Today, we're going to cover one of the most horrific domestic violence cases. Viewer discretion is advised. But before we get started, welcome to True Crime with Maneater. If you love all things true crime, including missing person cases, cold cases, and just the strange happenings of the world, you've come to the right place. Be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss video upload. Let's get started. Kelly Ann Bates was born May 18, 1978. She was living in Hattersley, England with her family, and by all accounts, Kelly's family was incredibly close. They would describe Kelly as confident, independent, incredibly mature for her 14 years of age, and quite intelligent. And at the age of 14, Kelly was an avid babysitter for the families in her neighborhood. She really did enjoy her independence and working for her own money, and just using her extra time to do something good. Because Kelly was so mature for her age, when she told her family that she had a boyfriend named Dave, they didn't think much of it. They assumed that she had met a boy at school and quickly developed feelings for him. What Kelly's parents didn't know is Dave didn't exist. In fact, his real name was James Patterson Smith, and he was 45 years old. James had met Kelly while she was at a babysitting job, and she was 14 at the time. He apparently had become smitten with Kelly, and quite frankly, probably a little bit obsessed. But Kelly knew that her parents would not approve of this relationship. So she lied and said his name was Dave, and she wouldn't give her parents much more information about the subject. So for 2 years, Kelly pretty much kept this relationship a secret. When she was 16 years old, she would bring Dave to meet her family. Kelly's mother, Margaret, would say when she first met Dave, the hair on the back of her neck stood up. She knew that this wasn't a schoolboy, and he certainly wasn't in his 30s, although Kelly claimed he was. Kelly would tell her mother, Margaret, that Dave was in fact 32 years old and that it was okay because she always hung out with older people. And really, she was going to be dating older people anyway. She was really mature for her age and she knew that. Although Kelly's parents had reservations about this so-called man named Dave, he did seem to care a lot about Kelly. He would even go as far as calling Kelly's parents sometimes to discuss the fact that Kelly was staying out all night long. When I think about the fact that this man was calling her parents, I feel like that's kind of a parent act in itself. I mean, he was old enough to theoretically be her father, and he's calling to talk about his so-called girlfriend and the fact that she's staying out all night and all of that stuff. That's not something a partner would do, that's something a parent would do. And for me, that's just a really disturbing kind of insight into the relationship. In November of 1995, Kelly would move in with this man known as Dave. By this time, Margaret had learned that Dave wasn't his real name. She had learned that his name is James, and he was in fact 48 years old. Margaret would confront James about this, and he basically said to her, "I didn't tell you because I thought that you wouldn't want me with Kelly because of the age difference." I just want to stop here and say that he knew what he was doing, and he knew it was wrong. He had been grooming this girl since she was 14 years old, and their once bubbly, outgoing, and vivacious young daughter suddenly stopped seeing her family so much. In fact, on the rare occasions that they did see her, she was nothing like her previous self. She seemed to have lost quite a bit of weight, she wasn't bathing or taking care of herself. They would notice bruises on her body and bite marks. But Kelly would refuse to admit to her family that she was being abused by this man. And although her parents suspected and begged her to come home, Kelly refused to. Eventually, Kelly would stop seeing her family altogether. Margaret would receive a birthday card and an anniversary card with her daughter's name signed to it, but she realized that that wasn't her daughter's handwriting, and she knew that something was wrong. Margaret would go to the police, but in the eyes of the law, Kelly was an adult, and there's nothing they could do to intervene unless she called them. So they would give Margaret a bunch of domestic violence pamphlets and say, give these to your daughter, tell her to call us if, there's an act of violence being committed against her. That's all you can do right now. Unfortunately, Margaret would never be able to give these pamphlets to her daughter. On April 16th, 1996, James would make his way to the police station and tell them that his girlfriend, Kelly, had drowned in the bathtub. Police would arrive at Kelly's family home, and when Margaret saw them, the only thing she said was, "He killed her." Kelly was only 17 years old when she died. James would try to frame this as a tragic accident. He said that they were arguing and somehow she drowned in the bathtub. I'm not really sure what exact excuse he gave to the police, But when they arrived at his house, obviously to check out what was happening, the body of Kelly Ann Bates would tell a completely different story. I do want to pause for a moment and remind everyone that viewer discretion is advised. What I'm about to tell you next is incredibly distressing and could be triggering for many people. The pathologists who examined Kelly's body would find over 150 injuries, and these injuries were inflicted over the time period of a month. It quickly became apparent that Smith had been starving Kelly. He would even keep her tied to a radiator by her hair. She had been strangled, burned with a hot iron, stabbed multiple times in her mouth, her legs, her torso. He would disfigure Kelly by cutting her face, genitals, scalp with multiple tools, and he had gouged her eyes out at least 5 days before drowning her in the bathtub. He would burn her with scalding hot water when she wasn't tied to the radiator by her hair. He would tie her to a chair or wrap a ligature around her neck. He broke her arm and crushed both of her kneecaps, which meant that she couldn't move. She had to fully rely on this man for everything. The pathologist who examined her body would go on to say, "In my career, I have examined almost 600 victims of homicide, but I have never come across injuries so extensive." She had lost at least 44 pounds and was completely dehydrated. A list of her documented injuries include scalding to her buttocks and left leg, burns on her thigh caused by the application of a hot iron, a fractured arm, multiple stab wounds caused by knives, forks, and scissors, stab wounds inside her mouth, fresh injuries to both hands, mutilation of ears, nose, eyebrows, mouth, lips, and genitalia, wounds caused by a spade or pruning shears, both eyes gouged out, later stab wounds to the empty eye sockets, partial scalping. Obviously, James was arrested and charged for the murder of Kelly Ann Bates. And during trial, the prosecutor would say, was if he deliberately disfigured her, causing her the utmost pain, distress, and degradation. The injuries were not the result of one sudden eruption of violence. They must have been caused over a long period and were so extensive and so terrible that the defendant must have deliberately and systematically tortured the girl. Police would find Kelly Ann Bates in the bath as James had claimed, but they knew that he had knocked Kelly unconscious with a shower head and then forced her head underwater. As authorities are investigating the home, they find that there's blood smeared all over the home. In every single room, there was Kelly's blood. They knew that she had been tortured. James would say that basically Kelly did all of this on her own. He said that her death happened on accident, and that Kelly often self-inflicted injuries just to upset him. Even at trial, he would declare his innocence and say, "Kelly would put me through hell winding me up." He would say that Kelly would taunt him about his dead mother and often hurt herself to make it look like he was doing bad things to her. Of course, there's overwhelming evidence to prove otherwise. They even asked him, well, why was she blinded and stabbed and tortured? He would say that Kelly basically dared him to do so. During his trial, there would be witnesses coming forward to testify about James's abusive behavior. He had been married once, and he abused his wife just as badly. Her only way out was divorce. One of James Smith's relationships was with Tina Watson, who was 20 at the time. Tina had been expecting Smith's child, and eventually he would start to use her, quote, as a punching bag. She would go on to say that, "At first it was now and again, just a little tap, but in the end it was every day. He would smack me in the face or hit me over the head with an ashtray. He would kick me in the legs or between the legs." She was able to escape the relationship, but not before James Smith tried to drown her. When that relationship ended in 1982, unsurprisingly, Smith started to groom a 15-year-old child. He, of course, would abuse her just the same, and in one attack, he would hold her head underwater in a kitchen sink. Jurors would take less than an hour to come back with a guilty verdict. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years. The judge would say, "This has been a terrible case, a catalog of depravity by one human being upon another. You are a highly dangerous person. You are an abuser of women, and I intend, so far as it is in my power, that you will abuse no more." Because of how terrible this case was, not only just hearing everything in court, but the jury had to look at pictures of the autopsy. They would see what happened to Kelly. And because of this, they were offered counseling, and every single member of the jury accepted this offer. And that should tell you a lot about how sickening and how violent this case really was. Margaret would reflect back on the exact moment that she met James Smith in her kitchen. She would say that when she met him, she just had this desire to kill him. She would say, "It was a bizarre thought. I would never normally think of anything so violent, and now I wonder whether it was some sort of sixth sense." So I've heard a lot about this case, and I did want to cover it because I think these conversations are so important to have. When I read threads about it, I see that a lot of people are blaming the parents. I do want to stop and note that in the eyes of the law, Kelly was considered an adult, and there was nothing that they could actually do about it. And I also want to make sure that we know that this wasn't Kelly's fault. Kelly was 14 when she met this man, and he groomed her. She hadn't had any relationship before this, so his possessiveness, his controllingness, all of that looked like love to her. It looked like he cared and loved her so deeply that he just was completely consumed with her. Smith knew what he was doing when he chose her as his victim. He knew that she was a young girl who was madly in love with him, and he knew that he could use this to his advantage. We can assume his relationship didn't work out with his 20-year-old because she knew better. She knew that this was wrong and that she had to get out. And I'm sure deep down, Kelly knew that what was happening was wrong, but she didn't understand why. She didn't understand why it was happening to her, or why somebody she loved so deeply and somebody who claimed to love her would do this to her. It's hard for me to formulate the words because this is a very emotionally taxing case for me to cover for many reasons, but I do want to cover it because it's so important that if you are a victim of domestic abuse, male or female, is that you get out safely. And I know that's easier said than done, but there are so many resources out there to help you. And I do plan on linking them in the bio below. I want everyone to remember that they don't deserve abuse in any sort of form. Victims don't do anything to deserve abuse. And it's always so easy to say, why didn't they just leave? But there's a lot to factor in when making the decision to just leave, whether that's financial, emotional, physical, and sometimes all of those things in one. So if you or someone you love or someone you know is experiencing violence, please seek help. I will be including the information for the National Domestic Violence Hotline and their website. Please reach out, please get help, and please find your way out. But that's it for today, guys. If you like this video or any other video on my channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss a video upload. I'm not going to ask for video suggestions. I would love for everybody to put the domestic violence hotline or resources from their country in the comments below. That way, not only is my country covered, but everybody else's country who watches this could also be covered. And that way, wherever you are, if you're in a violent situation, you can find the information in the comments below. Thanks, guys.